Good evening. It's time to have a bit of a chat. I've been promising that I am going to get back to more Dungeons and Dragons specific content, my thoughts on D&D and things of that nature. So, I've decided that the best place for me to start looking at books and Dungeons and Dragons 5e is to start with Players Handbook. Now, I spent a lot of time thinking about how I wanted to do this. Obviously, the book's been out for a while. I've got it right there. If you play D&D at all, you've got this book. So, doing a review of this, a book that's been out for years, doesn't make much sense. But I still want to start with that, because that's where most players are going to start with D&D. That being said, I decided what I want to actually do is take a look at that 5e Player's Handbook. But the way I want to have a look at it is I want to compare it to what was the Player's Handbook for, while not the beginning of my time playing D&D, at least the most formative years of me running games, being a DM, being a quite serious hardcore player. I want to compare that 5e Player's Handbook to that one, the 3.5 Player's Handbook. So, starting out, cover art. A lot of people love the look of the new 5e books. They kind of have this full cover illustration art going for them. To be honest, agreed, much like many of the older series books had. Personally, though, for myself, I really loved the aesthetic. I'm pointing to the wrong side here. I really loved the aesthetic of 3.5. These kind of tomes. And as we start to go through them, you'll see that all of the books in the set all keep that same aesthetic. And it, to me, just made them feel a little bit more special. Now then, moving into the books, first thing we're going to hit is a table of contents. Very sorry there. Still not feeling 100%. Alright, table of contents. You'll see, for one, that the 5e book looks a lot less cluttered. I keep pointing to the wrong side. The 5e book looks a great deal less cluttered. Might be that it's using larger text, the 2 columns instead of 3. But that being said, you still notice a lot of the same things. We've got races, we've got classes. 5e kind of did away with the chapter on skills and feats, and put all of that into kind of the background and description area. We've still got equipment. The rest of the skill stuff is kind of in the chapter 7 using ability scores. We do eventually then get into adventuring in both books. Combat rules, magic rules. For the most part, these books are fairly similar. There's not going to be that much content-wise that's going to differ between them. Now, one thing that I will point out is that the 5e Player's Handbook, because it did slim down the rules in a lot of other areas, had a bit more room to squeeze in some more talk about the gods and the planes, and a little bit more background information that kind of, if you notice, was not specifically called out in the 3.5 book. You could argue that that's because in 3.5 they gave all of that its own book, the Manual of the Planes, but I do think, actually, I have to give the point to 5e on this one. Having that little bit of background in the Player's Handbook means that everybody has their hands on it. And I do think that's definitely a big plus of the 5e book. Alright, moving on into the books now. The next thing I'm going to look at is ability scores. Now, this is an interesting one, because in the 3.5 book, that is the first thing that they jump into. As soon as they give you the table of contents, they give you the ability scores. In the 5e book, over on this side, they wait all the way until chapter 7 before they actually explain to you what those are. Now, because ability scores are quite focal to your character, I kind of feel a little bit disappointed that 5e buried that so far back. In fact, you're going through the races and the classes and all of that, and you're seeing all of this talk about ability scores through there, ability score improvements and this and that and the other, and you don't even know what they are yet. So in this case, I think the ability score point has to go to 3.5. I think that the way that they introduce them is a bit better. They give you, if I scroll through here, some examples of specific creatures. You know, what kind of a creature has a 3 strength or a 30 strength? Now, yeah, the numbers in 3.5 are a lot bigger. In 5e, they basically tell you that you're not going to really ever, in most games, get above 20. Whereas in 3.5, it's very easy to cap out well above 20. But yeah, I definitely think burying the ability scores, bad move for 5e. Alright, we are into the classes. Now, something that jumps out here to me, other than the chapter break, which, again, took me 3 times as long to find in the 5e version, multi-class. Way up at the front, jumping out at you. Big, bold, check this out, this is something you can do. In 5e, not so much. They mention it in a little blurb somewhere much further along in the book, but it's not really given much attention. I think that's something that's really missing from 5e. The multi-class characters, which, yes, I admit, you can still do them in 5e, they still work, you can still play them, but I think a lot of people forget about them, or are not aware of them, if they do not play the older editions, because 5e doesn't do a good job of highlighting that they exist, that they're a possibility, that they're an option. So, for that, 3.5 gets the point. Now, the next thing to get into, of course, is going to be the stat blocks. I'm not going to spend a lot of time debating base attack bonus versus proficiency bonus. I've actually had videos in the past where I've discussed the differences there, why I actually think the attack bonus is better excuse me, than the proficiency bonus, but I get why D&D simplified it and, in my opinion, dumbed it down. But that being said, the stat blocks from one to the next look very different. And that's due to a couple reasons. One of them is that proficiency bonus. In 5e, your proficiency works as your attack bonus and your bonus for any saves which you are proficient in. That means that you have an option of you are either good at a save or you are not good at a save. 3.5 over here, you'll notice there's a lot more information. There's fort saves, ref saves, will saves. That's because actually in 3.5 you had some saves that you were really good at, and you might have had some saves that you were okay at, and then you had some saves that you weren't great at. It was a lot more fluid. You had a lot more adjustability, which I think the proficiency bonus took away, in the same way that I think advantage disadvantage took away from giving bonuses. But I'm not going to get onto that rant again. I've already had that discussion in a earlier video, so you can always go back and watch me get upset in that one if you really want to. Aside from that, the way the classes are laid out, to be honest, I don't think there's that much difference. I really, other than artwork, I think 5e does have some better art, although for some reason they left those areas not in color. I don't get that. But I'd say it's a tie. Classes, I'm going to say it's a tie because there's not that much difference. I suppose really the only big difference is when you get into your classes, giving the bard as an example, and in 5e you now have your if my brain would work, your colleges. So basically what 5e has done is it's taken a lot of things that used to be prestige classes. So you become a bard and then you become a lore bard or a whatever other prestige class it may be. You become a rogue and then you become an arcane archer. They've taken those prestige classes and they've turned them into an integral part of the class. I have to say I'm not a fan of this because it takes away a lot of control. Well, you know, I actually might want to go 10 levels of rogue and then start becoming an arcane archer. Oh, no. In 5e, 3rd level, you become an arcane archer. It's just the way it is. That's the kind of rogue that you are. Well, I don't like it. Why? And I think it also goes back to that whole dumbing down multiclassing. Because 3.5 explained multiclassing to you early on, 3.5 then was not afraid of using multiple classes. It said, look, this is how the system works. If you want to be a rogue and you want to be an arcane archer, you become a rogue and then you become an arcane archer. 5e doesn't encourage that in the same way. And because of that, I think they felt the need to simplify it. Yet again, I keep using that word. And then say, okay, no, if you're a fighter, or if you're a rogue, or if you're a bard, these are the kinds of bards you can become. Well, for one, that gets rid of the idea of just being a bard. You now have to be one of these specific types of bards, rather than just being a bard. You can argue maybe that the lore bard is the standard bard, and then the others are alternates. I think in the effort of simplifying, again, they've lost out on depth, on customization, on player choice. And because of that, I'm going to have to give the classes to, 3.5, that side. I just think that the way that they're designed in 3.5 is better. Alright, moving on now. The next thing I want to look at is skills. Now, again, 3.5, a whole chapter on skills. Lots of information. What skills do, what you do with them, how you use them, who gets what skills, who can use what untrained, what ability they're based off of. A lot of talk about difficulties. How difficult should something be? How should it work if you're untrained, if you're trying again? How long do they take? What to do if something is practically impossible? How you aid someone? And then it starts going into the actual skills themselves. And you have half a page nearly on every skill. Talking about how you make a check, what happens when you make a check, how long a check takes, can you try again, does anyone have any special things that adjust to this, and then they even talk about synergies. So if you have a lot of ability in one skill, is that going to help you to use another skill? It's a very in-depth, detailed, and in my opinion, well thought out skill system. Chapter 4, fairly early in the book, right after you've chosen your race and your class. Now, in 5e, we've jumped all the way back into that chapter 7 where we talked about the ability scores. And what you get is a little bit of talk about how skills are broad things that you don't really want to pin down too much. And then it tells you about each ability score, and then it gives you like a paragraph about each skill with a couple examples of you're trying to do something, so roll this skill. It's not giving any DCs. It's not telling you how easy or how difficult it is. It's just trying to say, oh, well, if you try something kind of like this, use this one. If you can't tell from my voice, I hate this. Each skill had a specific purpose, a specific meaning. And there were some fairly standard difficulties that, unless you were adjusting them for world balance, could be used in most every situation. You know, if you are looking to balance on a 3-inch wide piece of stone, roll a 15. Oh, wait, but it's actually slippery because it's wet. Okay, +2. Roll a 17. It helps you to gauge how difficult the standard game world thinks something should be. Whereas balance in 5e became acrobatics. And what we get for that is your check covers your attempt to stay on your feet in a tricky situation, such as when you're trying to run across a sheet of ice, balance on a tightrope, or stay upright on a rocking ship's decks. Okay. How hard are those things? How skilled do you need to be to do that? I've been running the game for a while, so I'm comfortable making up a number. But a new DM just starting out, that's just asking for trouble. You're not giving them anything. You're not even giving examples to guide. I really just think that they gave skills the short end of the stick in 5e. Not happy with that. Not at all. Alright. Jumping ahead then, we've now skipped into the feats chapter. Well, at least in 3.5, it's the feats chapter. In 5e, it's not even its own chapter. This is chapter 6, I believe, where they finally get around to talking about multiclassing. They give you a page and a half talking about it, and then they say, oh, and then, you know, if you'd like to customize your character a little bit more, your DM can let you use feats as an extra feature. Well, feats used to be kind of an important part of things. In 5e, again, they're a bit overlooked. In fact, they're not even considered to be standard rules. They're an addition that you can allow. And no one gets them by default. You have to sacrifice something else in order to trade it for that thing that you're being allowed to get. Not a fan. Again, I think this, hands down, in my opinion, goes to 3.5 being a better product. I enjoyed the feats, allowing you to customize your character. Now, granted, some people do argue that there were too many feats. There were a lot of feats, and there were chains of feats that connected together and interacted with each other, and I get that some people thought it was too confusing, but to me, building a character with the right feats was a major part of building a proper character. In 5e, the feats, in a lot of cases, actually do more. They're actually more powerful than the 3.5 feats. But that's because you get less of them, or you get none of them unless you buy them as an extra. And at the same time, because they've tried to make them bigger, they're now a lot more general. They're a lot less niche. They're a lot less focused. And because of that, I think they're also a lot less fun. So once again, when it comes to feats, got to give it to 3.5 as the winner yet again. You can probably see where this is going by this point, but I'll go through the rest of the book anyway. Alright, next section, equipment. We are actually in Chapter 7 in the 3.5 book. In Chapter 5, so we've jumped backwards again in the 5e book. They actually listed equipment before they finished the rest of the character stuff about multiclassing and feats and even skills. Again, I don't understand. You choose your race, you choose your class, you choose your equipment, and then they tell you what your skills do? Your skills should kind of drive some of that earlier stuff. So, yeah. I don't like the overall layout, the order of the 5e book as much. It doesn't seem to make sense. But again, we are looking at equipment. Now, the 3.5 book starts out with some random starting gold tables if you want to just give your characters money rather than equipping them. It talks about selling loot. It talks about trade goods, which are very, very handy to have. It talks about, conversions, and then it talks about weapons. If we look at the 5e book, it's not too dissimilar. It gives you some starting wealth by class, gives you some exchange rates, it talks about selling treasure, and then it jumps straight into armor. So, it doesn't tell you as much information about types of weapons or types of armor. It just immediately jumps into, and here's the stuff. Gone are the tiny and large weapons. That's all a thing of the past. When we finally do get to the weapons tables, though, in the 5e book, we'll skip past the armor to do that. They don't look too different. Obviously, thematically, they look a bit different, but they each are either simple or martial. 3.5 also has exotic weapons, which don't seem to exist anymore in 5e. You have a cost. You have a damage number. In 3.5, you have a critical modifier, because some weapons actually did different critical values than others. Again, 5e, that magic word that I hate so much, simplified that out of existence. Now, if you hit with a weapon, you always do double the dice. Every time. Doesn't matter if it's a weapon that's a stick off the ground, or if it's a rapier that is designed for causing critical damage. Annoyed. Yeah, I mean, I'll just say it. I do kind of like the idea that they've added in the whole finesse and versatile thing to the weapons in 5e. Basically saying that you don't have to have a special skill to use a weapon with finesse, or a feat, rather. Instead, if a weapon's designed to be used with finesse, it can be used with finesse. Or if it's designed to be one- or two-handed, it can be. I like that. That's a bonus in 5e. That is good, but I don't think it makes up for the loss of our criticals. So, moving on from there before I go into a rant. Alright, having moved on now, we're now at the combat chapter. Now, this is where I start to really get frustrated with 5e. If you look at the 3.5 book, it talks about the battle grid, how combat works, combat statistics. So it takes you through all of the different numbers that you have to look at, the rounds, the initiatives, the actions, attacks, etc. And it gives you a breakdown of all of that, and then it goes back and it gives you each of those in more detail with pictures and measurements and kind of a lot more detail. You have full lists of actions in combat and what causes and does not cause attacks of opportunity. That's huge. It actually just spells it out for you. It tells you this is how it is. You also have different types of actions, which has been slimmed down quite a bit, simplified in 5e. But overall, there's a lot of information here. There's a lot of detail that you kind of have to troll through in the 3.5 book. And as you can see as I'm talking, I'm still scrolling through all of it. There's a lot here. It's dense. It's wordy. There, we're finally out of it there. Yes, it can be complicated for a new player. Now, the 5e book. We start out, we talk about order of combat. We start talking about initiative, reactions, movement, breaking up your move, moving around creatures, creature sizes, actions. Okay, that's when we actually start then describing the different things you can do on your turn. We didn't really get any kind of a initial overview. We just kind of are hitting things as we get to them. Making an attack, how you do it, using unseen attackers and targets, ranged attacks, melee attacks, cover, damage and healing. There's still a lot of information here, but you can see it's a lot shorter than the 3.5 version. That would be great. Slimming it down, making it easier to understand, would be great, except, and this is the big except, half the information that you need is not here. They didn't actually shorten the chapter by making the rules shorter. I mean, in some ways they did. But in a lot of cases, what they did was they shortened the combat chapter by putting a sentence in that chapter and then the rest of the description of something somewhere else. So now, instead of finding all of it in the combat chapter, you look at the combat chapter, and then you look at the skills chapter, and then you look at the activities area, and then you look at this and that and the class, and they kind of spread everything out to the point that, for one, they're a lot more ambiguous to begin with, so you don't actually know what they mean, and a lot of it's left to interpretation. And then if they have actually spelled out what they mean, it may be in 3 or 4 different places before you find it. very unimpressed with that one. I just really think that in the name of simplification, the 5e book dumbed itself down too much. Moving right along now, we move into magic, or as 5e says, spellcasting. Somehow or another, the chapters have synced back up again, so now we are on chapter 10 in both books once more. 3.5 is going to start out by jumping straight into choosing a spell, concentrating, counter spells, and then it's going to talk about your levels, failure, special effects, combining effects, and then it's going to go into your descriptions and how they work. 5e, not too dissimilar. It's going to talk about what is a spell, spell levels, known spells versus prepared spells, types of spells, how you go about casting a spell. And this is what I mean, a lot of this about how you actually cast a spell, the timing of it, in 3.5 was in the combat chapter. Here, they kind of mentioned spell casting in the combat chapter, but then they left all the main rules in the spells chapter. So, you're never quite sure where you need to look for something. It talks about the different shapes of magic and spells, and then we get into the spells. So, not too dissimilar. I will say, though, that I think the 3.5 book does a lot better job of describing magic and how the spells work. The 5e book has some lovely flavor elements, but I just think that their description of the spells, how they work mechanically and thematically, is not as good as 3.5. Alright, we are almost through there now. And actually, this is where 5e starts to come into its own. Right at the very back of the book. 289 pages into the 5e book, 314 pages into the 3.5 book. The 3.5 book finishes out of spells and hits the index. And that's pretty much all she wrote. We get to the back cover. So, that's the 3.5 book basically done. The 5e book then goes into a number of appendixes. So you get some detailed information on different conditions that can be applied to you. In 3.5, a lot of these did exist, but were described as part of the effect that actually gave them to you, rather than kind of keywording them and putting them in one place. I do think that simplifies things, actually in a positive way, for once. I know most times I've said simplifying and I've meant it very negatively. And then we go into the gods of the multiverse. Now, it is worth calling out that the 3.5 book does have an area that talks about the gods. But 3.5 was set in a specific world setting. So it didn't kind of cross over between different worlds or pantheons or gods or any of that. So we kind of got this page in the description chapter, where it went through and it talked about the deities. And we got kind of a paragraph, maybe two, under each one of them. Which, yes, it is helpful, but it's not much information. You then had to go digging a lot more if you actually wanted to find out any more. Now, this one actually then starts out by going into the different domains or the different realms of D&D. So you've got the Forgotten Realms, you've got Greyhawk, Dragonlance, Eberron, you've got non-human pantheons. And then it actually lists all of them. All of them. Tons and tons of gods. It then goes a step further, which this to me is amazing, because it goes into, okay, what if you wanted to use a real world pantheon? What if you wanted to use the Celtics, or the Greeks, or the Egyptians, or the Norse gods? And then it actually gives you some basic information on all of those as well. Now, we have not seen that level of detail as far as the deities go since way back. And I'm reaching back now. We haven't had that level of detail about historical stuff since that book. We're talking about a long time ago. You did get some of it in the deities book in 3.5, but that was mainly talking about how you would convert them, not actually giving you any information about them. Whereas this book here, and this was old D&D, it actually did go into things like the Norse mythos, and still a good reference. Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, 1980. Book's just a little bit older than I am. But, yeah, still probably one of the best deity books that we've had in D&D history. So, 5e wins out on this part of it, hands down. And then we go into the planes and start talking about the different planes of existence, the spokes of the wheel, and all of that type of thing. Now, it's only a few pages. It's not a lot of information. But when you consider that in 3.5, we had to wait pardon me. We actually had to wait until we got that book before we actually delved into the planes at all. 3.5 didn't even really mention the planes, except for maybe mentioning a fire elemental was from, you know, the plane of fire, obviously. So, having the planes of existence in the Player's Handbook, another big bonus for 5e. I like that. Creature statistics. Again, it's not groundbreaking, but it's handy. These are common familiars. These are common summoned animals. These are things that you're going to run into a lot, that it's handy for a player to have in the Player's Handbook without having to go digging through the Monsters Manual, which is somewhere that most DMs don't really want players digging. That's a big plus. Again, I like that. 5e scores more points for its appendixes than it does for the book itself, in my opinion. And then we go into inspirational reading. Lists of books and information that will inspire ideas. It's only a page, but there's some good stuff in there. Well worth reading. And then we hit the index. It's a lot more dense. Even though there's less information in the book, in my opinion, the index is a lot more keyworded, a lot more dense than the 3.5 one. So, there we have it. The 5th edition Player's Handbook versus the 3.5 Player's Handbook. By all means, comment below. Let me know your opinion on the books, your opinion on the systems. Personally, I'm afraid to say that I think 5e has been dumbed down too much for its own good. I think we've lost a lot in the simplification of the system. Not to say it's a bad system. I still enjoy playing it. I just have to do a lot more homebrew to get it back to the level of complexity that feels right to me. The level where I actually feel like I have control, rather than it just kind of all being a bit random. Anyway, like, subscribe, stick around. I will be doing more of these reviews, either just of 5 ebooks or of 3.5 versus 5 ebooks. I'll probably try to post these fairly regularly, maybe once or twice a week. Let me know below if there's any specific books you'd like me to talk about, and I've probably got them around somewhere. Until then, have a great day.